Let's talk about Drive to Survive. Let's talk about Drive to Survive Season 3. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. No, I'm not in a supply closet. I just happen to live in a studio apartment and things are getting fixed in my bathroom and I have nowhere to store anything. But no joke, my coworkers were like, are you in a supply closet? What's going on here? Yes, okay, so let's talk about, excuse me, Drive to Survive Season 3. Look at that. This is my Daniel Ricciardo Renault hat. Thanks to my friend Megan who got this for me for Hanukkah. And I have a Daniel Ricciardo McLaren shirt that I got, which was way too much money. It was like $60 in total. That shirt's not worth $60. Anyway, let's get to it. Let's get to it. I finished the series. I was trying to do a YouTube live and my account wasn't verified to do it. So let's do a quick video on what I liked about Drive to Survive and what I didn't like about Drive to Survive. First, I'm going to start with what I liked because there was more that I didn't like than what I did. So, number one, I did like the fact that we got to see more of Lawrence Stroll. I think that was really interesting how they talked about what was going on at Racing Point and how they ended up, like how Lawrence got there and also the pressure that Otmar was under. And then they also talked about Lance and like, you know, how Lance he's a good driver, but at the same time, you know, there's the politics that he's Lawrence's son, but we didn't really get to hear from Lawrence. We never really get to hear from him. So I thought it was really interesting that they actually sat down and interviewed him. I thought it was really interesting, especially when the whole controversy happened with them having their brake ducts when they were protested. And basically the whole premise ends up being, which I'll get to and I didn't like, but I just thought the whole series was like everyone against Racing Point and Mercedes. But something I also liked, talking about controversy, is I thought it was very interesting how Netflix edited and showcased the, I can't talk, I just had coffee. That was number one. I liked us showing behind the scenes at Racing Point. Number two, I thought it was very interesting how they showed the controversy and the conflicts and the tension, I couldn't think of the word, that was going on at Ferrari. Now, very early on in the season, last year, it was announced that Sebastian Vettel's contract with Ferrari was not, I almost said Mercedes, whoa, imagine if he was in a Mercedes, ooh. A lot of people have said, Seb, if you put Seb and Lewis Hamilton together, you're gonna get a Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg situation where they were friends and they were teammates and now they're not friends. So let's avoid that because Seb and Lewis have major respect for each other. Anyway, I thought that was very interesting. So it was announced very early on last season that Sebastian Vettel was being let go at Ferrari at the end of the year. Now, it seems like maybe Ferrari was building up to this. Matteo Binotto says in the series that they want a younger driver, and Seb is not a younger driver. If anything, he's now considered one of the more experienced drivers. He's not old by any means. The guy is in his like early 30s, I think, and they want someone like Charles Leclerc, who is in his 20s, who has only been on the track for like 4-ish years, and so they are now able to get that with Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz, who is experienced, but Carlos Sainz is only 26. And what, Charles Leclerc is what, like 23? So they want two young drivers, and Seb is not a young driver. I thought it was very interesting how Seb basically, in total Seb fashion, because he's been in this for so long, was like, I can say whatever I want. At one point, he's doing an interview with Charles, and I felt bad. He made Charles so uncomfortable. Which part of me was like, dude, don't do that. Like, don't make your teammate uncomfortable, you know? It's not his fault. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. But they talk about how I guess Charles was supposed to release a clothing line, and Seb makes a joke that they can't because they have a sponsorship with Puma, and Seb goes, I'm leaving the team, I can say whatever I want. Ooh, and then later on, we find out that, well, we knew this already going into it, but Seb announces he signed on with Aston Martin taking Checo Perez's seat the same day as Ferrari's 1000th Grand Prix, their 1000th race. And they show video of a meeting among Seb and the Ferrari people, and Sylvia, who you may have seen in YouTube videos, she's their head of communication. She has this like fun red hair, and she's like basically telling Seb like, why did you do this? Like, you know, it's causing issues for us, it's gonna cause issues for you. And Seb goes, yeah, well, it's the truth. Yikes, 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 yikes. I forgot who said it, but I don't know if it was Christian Horner, because throughout the series, this also is number 3, which I like. I liked that Christian Horner kind of made comments and talked about the different drivers throughout the season. Christian is a very observant man. This is a guy who, it's funny, I just realized this as I was watching it, but all of the drivers who changed teams for 2021, with the exception of Checo coming to Red Bull, all of them are past Red Bull drivers. Daniel Ricciardo, Sebastian Vettel, and Carlos Sainz. Carlos was on Toro Rosso. So I thought that was very interesting, and I'm wondering, did Christian like train these kids or something? Because they all started out basically on Red Bull, and now they're all switching. I thought that was very interesting. And now you have Checo coming on to Red Bull, which I think is so exciting. I hate to say it, they show in the series basically the downfall of Alex. I do appreciate the fact that I think they still believe in Alex, and Christian says throughout the whole series he's a good driver, but he's just not there yet, but he's great. And I think that's why they didn't want to completely demote him to AlphaTauri. That's why they wanted him to stay on as I think he's the reserve driver, if I'm correct. I think his Instagram just says that he's an F1 driver with Red Bull still, but I think he's a reserve driver, if I'm correct. So anyway, I liked how Christian kind of made comments throughout the whole season. He knows whether these drivers have worked for him or not. He's very familiar with all of them, and I thought it was very telling every time he talked about it. I also liked that he was still despite everything that happened, he was still in Alex's court, and I think that's gonna be number 4. I still liked that Christian, even though I think he's the real supervillain in this, not Lawrence Stroll. I think Lawrence Stroll is probably a little more ruthless than Christian. I do think that Christian is the real supervillain in all of this, because Christian will do whatever it takes to get the best team. We saw it last year when he demoted Pierre in the middle of the season, and we saw it this year after he, at the very end of the season, basically Alex lost his seat. I think Alex, though, knew it was coming. I don't think Pierre saw it coming. I think Alex knew he wasn't doing it well. And Alex kind of hints that, like, they threw him in pretty much. And I think he knows he needed maybe a little more experience to get into that Red Bull. But throughout the whole season, Christian is still very much in his court. And he's like, Alex is there. He's close to a podium. He's close to a podium. It's just that he had a lot of bad luck. Especially that first race where we had Brazil number 2 happen, where Hamilton hits into him. At least Hamilton got a penalty for that. But even then, Alex was so upset with himself. He can't even look at Christian. He is so upset. And Christian tells him, like, it's gonna come. Hey, Hamilton got the penalty. Hamilton got the freaking penalty, dude. Like, he got payback this time. Last time he didn't, And we know that Alex does eventually get a podium, which is very exciting. And it's the first time the Thai flag is flown on a Formula 1 podium, which was very exciting. But at the same time, I thought that was very interesting that Christian still is very much like rooting for him. And I think that's why they didn't completely like take him off the team. He's still, in a way, very much part of the team. Maybe we'll see him in testing and practice runs this season, which would be really great. I think Alex could do really, really well in the future, and who knows. I'm excited though that Checo got his seat. Yeah, I'm trying to think what else I also really liked. Here's the last thing I really liked. Number 5 being, I liked how we finally heard from Valtteri Bottas. So in episode 3, which, just a warning, there's a naked Valtteri Bottas. He has a nice butt though. They show Valtteri's like, he's such an interesting character, but they highlight how He is so bothered by being number 2. It is so, I don't care what Toto Wolff says. I don't care if Toto says that they don't treat Valtteri like the number 2 driver. They treat Valtteri like the number 2 driver. It's so obvious, and it shows how like he and Lewis, not friends whatsoever. Valtteri has always been so close to winning a championship, but he knows his teammate is the best ever. And they show one thing where like they're doing some conference. Valtteri doesn't even want to be in the same room as Lewis. He goes to a different room and he does it over a laptop. He doesn't even want to be in the same room as him. And he talks about how he is really bothered by the fact that he is the number 2 driver and Lewis wins and he doesn't. He's like, yes, it's great to get these podiums, but not when you're number 2, when you're constantly number 2, when you're so close. And I can only imagine how he felt when George Russell got in the car at the end of the season and George overtook him. George was leading the race at one point. Can you imagine what he thought? This former rookie, this kid who's been in Formula 1 for what, 3 years, not even, overtakes? Whoa. It was really good. It was really eye-opening, and I thought it was really great to finally hear from him. I'm sure there's going to be some things in there Mercedes did not like, but I don't care what you say. They treat him like the number 2 driver, and I think Valtteri is a very, 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 very good driver. He's in the best car on the track. But, yeah, I totally see where, you know, he's clearly like a little bit distraught because, you know, what do you do when your teammate's the greatest in the world? You know, I think there's an interview with Sky Sports that's on YouTube where they talk to Nico Hülkenberg. They talked to Nico Rosberg about that. But let's get into what I didn't like. So, number 1, why wasn't there any mention of some of the drivers getting coronavirus? There was nothing about Checo getting COVID and Nico Hülkenberg coming back. Why did we not highlight Hülkenberg? That was such a good opportunity. Such a good opportunity. Oh my God, guys, that was so exciting to have Nico Hülkenberg back. And not only that, but the first time he came back, he freaking killed it. He got P3 in qualifying. Like, why didn't we highlight that? Also, you know, we know Lance also got COVID. We know that Lewis gets COVID. There was nothing mentioned about it. And I thought it was so strange. Number 2, I also want to talk about the fact that they did not cover anything about the Williams family selling the business. That was a really big freaking deal when it happened. This is a family-run team. Claire Williams is the only woman team principal on the track. She is like at the highest you could be when it comes to a Formula 1 team besides the driver. She's the highest. She's in charge. She leads the family name. It was her with all the other drivers, not all the other drivers, all the other team principals. You saw her with Zach Brown, with Cyril Abiteboul, with Christian Horner. It was basically like all of them against Toto Wolff and Otmar. Like, she was part of that. And there's nothing. There is no mention of the fact that they sold the team. In fact, Williams isn't really covered at all in this season, even though they've been covered in past seasons. Nothing. I was shocked. I was really upset about that. Like, really? That was such a good storyline. Which also leads me to number 3, which I didn't like. They didn't cover anything about George and the Mercedes. Nothing about George going into the Mercedes and how incredibly big of a deal that was. George Russell, who has been under Mercedes management, Toto Wolff is his manager, been under Mercedes management. Toto Wolff is basically peppering him to become the next Lewis Hamilton. Everyone, Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton both have said George is a future world champion. But George went into that Mercedes, and despite the chaos that happened, despite the fact that Mercedes had a really bad race in the end, George killed it in that race. He took that Mercedes and ran with it, and there was nothing in the series about it. I understand we all know these things have happened, and we're watching this series knowing what has happened, knowing that Romain Grosjean got very badly injured in a crash, knowing, well, I shouldn't say very badly injured, he he was very lucky, and they do cover that, and I did appreciate that. And I think it was great to hear from his wife as well. But there's so much more that happened before that. Like, I was just really disappointed there. Yeah, and I think that leads me to number 4, being that I really didn't like the format of this season compared to the past series, the past seasons. Usually it worked out where they would kind of cover a team per race, but this time they chose to focus almost the whole series on the politics of what was happening, and we heard more from the team principals than we did the actual team members. And they didn't really cover any of the teams. We didn't hear anything from Williams. We mainly heard from, again, like Daniel Ricciardo, Alex Albon. We heard a lot from Checo, actually, which was really nice. We heard a lot from Lance. They were like really select drivers, where I feel like in the past seasons, almost like every driver has been interviewed. We heard even a bit from Lewis. Oh, and that leads me to something else that they vaguely covered until the end, which I'll mention in a sec. But I didn't like that the whole series was all about the politics, and it was basically everyone against Mercedes and Racing Point, and you know, Racing Point didn't do anything illegal, and Toto's on their side, and Amar's trying to explain himself, and just like, it was just like, I don't know, I just didn't like that the whole thing was about the politics. Like, why not focus on the race, and why not focus on how F1, it took them months and so much time and effort to make sure the races were safe for the drivers and were safe for the workers, and all the things they had to put in place for COVID. Like, none of that is basically mentioned at all. So, yeah. And they didn't really go into too much of the politics about why. I mean, they sort of did, I guess, talking about all the driver changes. They did cover some of Kevin and Romain Grosjean and how they were very upset with Haas, that Haas let both of them go. I think it would have been really great to have covered, they did cover Mick Schumacher for a hot sec, which was great, but I also didn't like the fact that they didn't cover, I guess this will be what, number 6 now? That they didn't cover the controversy of Haas hiring Nikita Mazepin, and that whole storm that brewed over last season, and how so many people were upset with Haas for hiring him. He's a very controversial driver. I think it also would have been interesting if they maybe interviewed Callum Ilott, who they kind of, for a hot sec, like talked about, you know, Callum was up for an F1 seat and he didn't get it, and he should have gotten it. Yes, he's gonna have a job with Ferrari, which is amazing, but still, like, he should have gotten the seat over Nikita. He was so much more deserving of it. I think that would have been very interesting too. We heard from Mick Schumacher for like a hot sec from when he was in Austria, and the poor kid didn't even get to do the practice run with Alfa Romeo because it was too foggy and they didn't do practicing. So anyway, that leads me to my very last one, which is they very vaguely highlighted Lewis's push for the Black Lives Matter movement and the We Race as One movement that started at the beginning of the season. Lewis says that they don't highlight it, I'm not kidding you, until the very last, like 10 to 15 minutes of the very last episode, which is like really annoying. I think they should have covered that from the first, when they first went back. Oh, I just also thought of something else they didn't cover, which I will get to after this. So they didn't cover that. He talks about how, you know, he's not going to be silent. He's much more outspoken than their drivers. And yes, he is the only black driver on the grid, which he says, like, you know, it makes you wonder why aren't there other black drivers on the grid. I mean, we're finally getting Yuki Tsunoda, who's a Japanese driver. And how long has it been since there was an Asian driver on the track? Probably a really long time. The sport is incredibly European white dominated. That's it. And I would have loved to have heard more from Lewis about how he got everyone to rally together and take a knee during the beginning of the races and come together and say, like, we race as one and all of that, and none of that was really covered. And again, it was not even covered about, you know, when he got COVID. All they said was he comes back in for this interview and the guy said, wow, you recovered so quickly. There was no mention that he ever got COVID, but we know that from watching the race season. There's so many continuity errors in this season, it drives me up a wall. Which leads me to the very last thing they didn't cover, which I think would have been really nice if they did. When they were at Spa, and they do a whole episode on Pierre Gasly, which I was so happy about, because man, was he the comeback kid this season. And even Christian Horner, I think it was him who said, if anything, Pierre is the driver of 2020. Pierre's done it. And we know Pierre really killed it this season. I mean, really killed it. Really proved himself. He's trying to get back into the Red Bull seat. I agree with other YouTubers who say Pierre should never go back to Red Bull. He should go to another team. I think if he goes back to Red Bull, that's a really bad decision. I think another team would really, really, really push him to his limits and really appreciate him more so than going back to Red Bull and once again having to prove himself. And there's that thought of like, ooh, I could be demoted again. So yeah, I did not like the fact that during that episode they were at Spa and it was like they barely talked about what happened in 2019. And if you don't know what happened in 2019, I'm going to briefly explain that now. Antoine Hubert, who is a Formula 2 driver, so the Formula 2 races happen on the same tracks as Formula 1. And but they happen on Saturdays, I think. I don't know. I should get into Formula 2. I've heard it's really interesting. So there was a huge crash that happened in 2019 and it killed Antoine Hubert, and Juan Manuel Correa, who's now back in Formula 3, was severely injured to the point where I think his right leg was like completely rebuilt. And they did a huge tribute for Antoine during that weekend. Juan Manuel even came to Spa. This guy who was so traumatized by the fact that this happened, who couldn't even walk. He still had like pins in his legs. He made it, and they didn't even like cover it or talk to the drivers about it. I get that it was really traumatizing, but if you watch last season, Lewis Hamilton is doing an interview and he sees the crash happen and he stops and he goes, oh, I hope that kid's okay. That's not good. You know, even he knew it was bad. And there was like hardly anything mentioned. Pierre basically mentions it because he was the closest to Antoine and grew up with him and knew him. And you see him put flowers on the track where the crash happened and he prays, and then he just kind of goes back on his track walking like that's it. That's the only mention of it. Don't you want to maybe like honor this kid and maybe talk a little bit more about it? Maybe even interview one. I don't know. I just thought it was weird. It was really weird. And like I said, this whole season had weird continuity errors and certain things didn't make sense and certain things weren't mentioned. Like, I don't know. Overall, I'm sorry to say, but I was a little bit disappointed with this season because the last two seasons were so good and they showed so much. But I felt like this season we got more behind the scenes stuff from going to like each team's YouTube channel. You know, McLaren makes a great YouTube channel. Unboxed is a fantastic series. They have great content. I will say, speaking of this hat, I think Danny had incredibly valid reasons for leaving Renault, and he talks about that. I thought it was hilarious when Christian Horner also said, I keep going back and forth, guys, I'm sorry, but I thought it was hilarious when Christian Horner said, it's like your girlfriend broke up with you, but she hasn't moved out yet, and that's how it felt when Daniel told Renault he was leaving the next year because Cyril was not happy. But hey, now Cyril's out at Alpine, so which was Renault. Like now he's out, so I don't know. Yeah, I was not as impressed with this season as I was the last two. And that is why there were more things I didn't like. If you don't follow Formula One, there is so much that was not covered this season that you are going to need to catch up on. I hate to. Okay, either my camera is overheating or I ran out of memory, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. If you want me to do a Formula One predictions video, let me know, even though the new season is starting. So, yeah, those are my thoughts and feelings on Drive to Survive Season 3. It's out on Netflix now. Please subscribe, like this video, follow my podcast, OMG Stop Pod, on Instagram. My friend Krista and I do a podcast about 20-something life. We post every other Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for watching, and lights out and away we go.